We live in an age where silence feels like a sin. Every second, millions of voices compete for attention, typing, shouting, debating, performing. The digital realm hums with endless chatter, a constant symphony of opinions and outrage. Scroll through any feed and you'll see it. People arguing not to understand, but to be seen. To exist, one must speak. Loudly, endlessly, publicly. We mistake expression for existence. Visibility has become our new currency, and silence is bankruptcy. But beneath this noise lies a strange truth. The more we speak, the less we are heard. Words have become so cheap that even truth struggles to find a listener. And in this deafening marketplace of noise, those who stay silent begin to look dangerous, as if their restraint hides something powerful, something others can't control. The silent man unnerves people. In meetings, in crowds, even online, his quietness feels like a mirror that reflects others' insecurity. They wonder what he's thinking. They project, they speculate, they fear. Because silence creates ambiguity, and ambiguity is power. Niccolò Machiavelli, the master observer of human behavior, understood this centuries ago. He wrote that the wise ruler should be a great feigner and dissembler. Meaning, never reveal too much. Never let others read your intentions. Power, he implied, is not just in what you say, but in what you withhold. The loud man seeks validation. The silent man studies the room. One burns his energy proving his importance. The other gathers information, understanding the weaknesses of those too desperate to speak. And yet, in our modern world, silence is treated almost like guilt. If you don't post, you must be hiding. If you don't react, you must not care. If you don't join the noise, you're accused of indifference. But the truth is, silence isn't weakness. It's focus. It's discipline. It's the refusal to be manipulated by the emotional contagion of the crowd. When you choose silence, you step out of the endless cycle of reaction. You begin to observe rather than perform. You start to see how quickly people reveal themselves when they speak. Their desires, fears, vanity, insecurity. The loud man is predictable. The silent man is mysterious. The loud man seeks approval. The silent man earns respect. The loud man wants to be seen. The silent man becomes a shadow others can't define. In the age of noise, to be silent is to rebel. It is to refuse the addiction of attention, the seduction of validation. And that refusal, in a world addicted to reaction, is the first step toward true control. Because the man who can remain silent when others demand noise is the man who cannot be controlled by the world's chaos. And that kind of man, in every age, holds a power that words can't touch. Silence, in the eyes of Niccolò Machiavelli, was never emptiness. It was strategy. In The Prince, Machiavelli warns that a ruler should rarely reveal his true intentions. Because once people understand what you desire, they can predict you. And once they can predict you, they can control you. The moment your motives are known, you surrender leverage. So the wise man, he wrote, must be a great pretender and dissembler. He must speak only when it benefits him, and remain silent when it disorients others. This is the foundation of Machiavellian silence. Power through perception. To Machiavelli, the world was not governed by morality or truth, but by optics, by how one appears. Appear strong and you are strong. Appear certain, and others will doubt their own uncertainty. But speak carelessly, and you hand over your psychological armor. You give others access to your fears, your values, your plans. Words, once released, cannot be contained. They can be twisted, weaponized, and turned back against you. But silence? Silence cannot be betrayed. Throughout history, the most cunning leaders understood this instinctively. Julius Caesar was known for his calculated restraint, speaking less in councils than his rivals, yet when he did, his words carried finality. His silence commanded attention. It forced others to fill the space with their own assumptions. Centuries later, the same pattern would reappear. Vladimir Putin, before major political or military maneuvers, often retreats from public view. Analysts scramble to interpret his absence, projecting fear, confusion, and speculation. his silence becomes a storm of uncertainty, and that uncertainty itself becomes his weapon. Steve Jobs, in a completely different world, used silence in the same way. When unveiling Apple's most anticipated products, he would pause, long, deliberate, almost uncomfortable. The audience would hold their breath. That pause created suspense, focus, and control. He understood that what is not said often speaks louder than what is. Silence manipulates perception because it amplifies imagination. When a man says nothing, people are forced to construct meanings for him. They wonder what he knows. They interpret his restraint as confidence, wisdom, or even menace. That's the paradox of power. People fear what they don't understand. And silence creates the perfect vacuum for their imagination to fill. In politics, in business, even in relationships, silence shifts the balance. It allows the silent one to observe while others reveal themselves. It draws truth from the impatient. The louder someone speaks, the more they expose what they value, what they fear, what they need. The silent one, meanwhile, collects this information, quietly, patiently, strategically. To Machiavelli, this wasn't just prudence. It was self-preservation. Because in the chaotic theater of human affairs, words can kill faster than weapons. Promises create expectations. Opinions create enemies. Emotional reactions create vulnerabilities. But silence protects. He understood that the man who masters silence masters tension. He can force others to speak, to guess, to break under the weight of uncertainty. Silence becomes psychological warfare, a battlefield without blood. And that is why, from Caesar to Putin, from Jobs to every quiet strategist who ever held a room without saying a word, one truth remains constant. Speech reveals emotion. Silence reveals control. There is something deeply unsettling about a person who says nothing. When someone remains silent in a conversation, when they refuse to give away what they think, what they feel, or what they plan, the atmosphere shifts. You begin to wonder, what are they hiding? What are they thinking? Do they know something I don't? Silence disrupts predictability. And for the human mind, unpredictability is a threat. Psychologically, we are wired to seek patterns. Predictability gives us safety. It allows us to anticipate danger, avoid embarrassment, and control outcomes. When that predictability is taken away, we feel powerless. The silent person becomes an unsolved riddle, a question mark that the mind cannot leave alone. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But he also understood that the human psyche fears what it cannot define, both within others and within itself. Silence magnifies this uncertainty. It reflects back the observer's own projections. The quiet man becomes a mirror, revealing not his truth, but yours. When you cannot read someone, you begin to fill the void with your imagination, and imagination is rarely kind. You might interpret their silence as judgment, superiority, or hidden strength. You might even start to fear their calmness, mistaking it for cold control. This is the paradox of the unreadable mind. It gains power by doing nothing. It simply exists, unshaken, detached, and others, in their restless need for understanding, hand it authority. Friedrich Nietzsche explored this psychological tension in his reflections on power and individuality. He believed that strength lies in the ability to remain unaffected by the noise of the crowd, to transcend the compulsion to react. In a world addicted to performance, the man who does not perform becomes godlike. He is no longer a participant in the emotional chaos of others. He becomes its silent observer. In workplaces, this dynamic is everywhere. The loudest person in a meeting might attract attention, but it's often the quiet one. The one who listens, who speaks only once, and precisely, who shapes the final decision. Their silence commands gravity. It forces others to lean in. In relationships, silence plays another role. It shifts emotional control. The one who reacts least dictates the rhythm of interaction. When one partner argues and the other stays calm, the silence becomes a wall, impenetrable and frustrating. Yet, beneath that frustration lies respect, even fear. Because silence cannot be argued with. It cannot be defeated. Even in politics, the same psychology unfolds. Leaders who reveal less of their emotion, who guard their intentions behind an unreadable demeanor, project dominance. Their restraint signals control, and control is the essence of perceived strength. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He knew that people fear what they cannot predict and obey what they cannot manipulate. To remain unreadable is to remain untouchable. And that's the secret most never realize. Silence doesn't just conceal, it reflects. It holds up a mirror to everyone around it, exposing their impatience, their insecurities, their hunger for validation. The man who masters silence doesn't conquer others by force. He conquers them by withdrawal, by denying them the comfort of understanding. Because people do not truly fear power. They fear uncertainty, and silence is the purest form of it. Throughout history, the most powerful men were often not the loudest, but the quietest. Their silence was not weakness, nor hesitation. It was control. It was dominance expressed through restraint. It was a language of power understood only by those perceptive enough to feel its weight. Take Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king of Rome. Surrounded by the noise of empire, politics, betrayal, war, he retreated into his own thoughts. While other rulers delivered fiery speeches to assert dominance, Marcus turned inward, writing reflections in silence that would later become meditations. His philosophy of Stoicism taught that the highest form of strength is serenity in chaos. His words were few, his tone measured, but his presence was absolute. The Roman Senate feared his calm, because they could not read it. His silence didn't just command respect, it demanded introspection. The emperor's stillness was a mirror in which others saw their own frenzy. Then there was Niccolò Machiavelli, the man who would later define the very essence of power itself. When he was exiled from Florence, humiliated and stripped of influence, he did not protest publicly. He went quiet, but his silence was strategic. In isolation, he observed the movements of politics like a hunter studying prey. From that silence came The Prince, a masterpiece of psychological warfare disguised as political philosophy. Machiavelli learned that those who speak are easy to silence, but those who listen are impossible to predict. His silence was not submission. It was preparation. Travel eastward, and you find another master of silence, Miyamoto Musashi, the undefeated samurai of feudal Japan. Musashi fought over 60 duels and never lost, yet he spoke of battle as if it were meditation. "Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world," he wrote. In his silence before combat, opponents saw either arrogance or fear, but it was neither. It was presence. The kind of presence that comes only from mastery over one's own mind. He understood what few do, that true power is internal. The silent mind moves faster, strikes cleaner, and endures longer than the one filled with noise. Silence has always been the mark of those who transcend the ordinary. Even in modern times, its power persists, reimagined through new forms. Consider Michael Jordan, a man whose competitive fire burned silently behind an expression of focus. When teammates talked trash, he didn't respond with words, he responded with results. His silence was psychological warfare. It unnerved opponents and inspired reverence among fans. His calm wasn't emptiness, it was calculation. Or Keanu Reeves, an actor who has achieved global fame yet speaks rarely, almost reluctantly. In an industry addicted to attention, he remains detached, quiet, and composed. And paradoxically, that silence amplifies his presence. He has become a cultural symbol of humility, patience, and depth, the man who doesn't need to speak to be understood. Each of these figures reveals a timeless truth. Silence is not the absence of communication. It is the most refined form of it. Silence tells the world, "I am not desperate to be heard." It says, "I know when to act, and I choose not to hit." In Machiavellian terms, silence is the ultimate mask, the one that reveals nothing yet provokes everything. It creates an aura of mystery that forces others to interpret, assume, and speculate. Every assumption they make becomes a weapon turned against themselves. But here lies the paradox, the very edge of this blade. The more power silence gives, the more dangerous it becomes. For silence can easily turn into isolation, and restraint can harden into detachment. The man who guards his thoughts too closely may lose connection to the world entirely. And so, we arrive at an unsettling question, one that shadows every master of silence across history. Can silence itself become a weapon too sharp to wield safely? Silence, when misunderstood, becomes a prison. What begins as a weapon of power can easily turn into a shield of fear. It is here that Machiavelli's wisdom darkens, reminding us that every virtue, even silence, when taken too far, becomes its opposite. The same stillness that commands respect can also breed suspicion, loneliness, and decay. Machiavelli once wrote that isolation destroys rulers. A prince who retreats too deeply into his own mind loses touch with the pulse of his people, mistaking withdrawal for wisdom. Silence without strategy, he warned, becomes self-sabotage. Power is not sustained in solitude. It is sustained in the balance between distance and engagement, between knowing when to speak and when to remain still. This paradox has haunted thinkers and leaders for centuries. Silence may make you unreadable, but it can also make you invisible. The world begins to fill the gaps you leave behind. People start to project intentions onto your quiet, and those projections rarely align with truth. What was once strength begins to look like coldness. What was once composure becomes arrogance. The man who commands attention through mystery eventually risks becoming misunderstood, even feared. Psychologically, silence walks a razor's edge. On one side lies mastery, the ability to regulate emotion, to respond rather than react. On the other side lies repression, the slow burial of thoughts and feelings that demand acknowledgement. As Carl Jung observed, the parts of ourselves we silence do not disappear. They retreat into the unconscious, growing darker and more dangerous. The unspoken becomes the unseen, and the unseen eventually takes control. This is the territory of the shadow self, the place where our quiet conceals the emotions we refuse to confront. Rage that we disguise as calm, sadness that we mask as composure, fear that we rename as discipline. Over time, this false silence corrodes the mind from within. It is no longer the silence of strength, but the silence of suffocation. There are, in essence, two kinds of silence. The first is active silence, the Machiavellian kind. It listens, observes, and waits. It is aware, alive, and deliberate. This silence sharpens perception. It is the silence of a chess player studying the board before his move. Then there is passive silence, the silence of avoidance. It hides rather than observes. It fears confrontation, mistakes distance for peace, and calls numbness serenity. This silence doesn't protect the mind, it walls it off. Over time, it leads not to strength but to detachment, a slow emotional exile where the soul forgets how to feel. History is filled with men who lost themselves in that exile. Leaders who withdrew too deeply into secrecy and became paranoid. Thinkers who rejected the world so completely that their silence turned into bitterness. Even ordinary people who mistook stoicism for indifference, and in doing so, disconnected from the very humanity that gave their strength meaning. Silence is a weapon, but like any blade, it cuts both ways. It can carve clarity or carve isolation. It can make you powerful or make you forgotten. The difference always lies in intent. True silence is an act of mastery. False silence is an act of escape. One frees you, the other slowly erases you. We live in an age where silence is no longer golden. It's suspicious. Where the world demands your voice before your thoughts have even settled. A time when every second of quiet is filled by the endless noise of others fighting for attention. But here lies the paradox of power. The louder you speak, the less you're heard. The modern battlefield is no longer fought with swords or treaties. It's fought with words, tweets, statements, reactions, and narratives. And in this war, the ones who fall first are the loudest. Every empire today is built not on land, but on attention. Politicians, influencers, corporations, all play a desperate game of noise, fighting for the fleeting currency of visibility. The algorithm rewards outrage, impulsivity, and spectacle. Those who pause to think are buried by those who scream. But the wise, The truly dangerous understand that silence is the only form of control left in an overexposed world. Machiavelli, centuries ago, warned rulers to guard their words, to reveal nothing of their true intentions until the moment of action. In his world, silence was a form of armor. In ours, it's rebellion. The digital stage punishes the measured man. It mocks the calm observer. We've created a culture where reaction is mistaken for relevance and performance is mistaken for truth. Think of modern politics, where leaders rise through viral clips and fall through unguarded words. A single sentence, twisted and amplified, can undo decades of influence. Power no longer collapses from coups, but from microphones. The more one speaks, the more one exposes. And exposure, in the age of data and outrage, is vulnerability. In business, the pattern is the same. Those who build in silence, away from the crowd, seem invisible at first, until they emerge with something no one saw coming. The loud startups burn fast and fade faster. The quiet ones, focused and unseen, become institutions. History remembers them not for their noise, but for their precision. Even in our personal lives, this war of words shapes who we become. Every post, every opinion, every attempt to be seen chips away at the mystery that once gave depth to character. The constant sharing of thoughts, emotions, and identities has turned authenticity into exhibition. We no longer express to connect, we express to exist. And the moment we depend on expression to define us, we lose control of who we are. The silent strategist, however, understands the law of psychological gravity. What remains unseen grows in power. By saying less, he forces others to fill the silence with their own projections, fears, and curiosities. His restraint becomes dominance. While others waste their energy trying to be understood, he studies, waits, and strikes when the noise has exhausted itself. Silence, when mastered, is not emptiness, it's containment. It's the art of preserving energy, of protecting meaning from dilution. In a culture addicted to constant display, silence becomes the ultimate rebellion. It's the choice to remain invisible until visibility has purpose. So, in this modern war of words, remember, the algorithm favors the impulsive, but history favors the deliberate. The loud may win attention, but the silent shape destiny. In the end, all noise fades. The voices that once roared with certainty dissolve into the background, and only silence remains. But within that silence, there is something more powerful than all the words ever spoken. It is not absence. It is potential. Throughout history, the greatest minds understood this truth. Machiavelli knew that a ruler's silence could command more fear than 1,000 proclamations. The Stoics believed that power begins where reaction ends. And Jung taught that mastery comes not from suppressing the self, but from knowing which parts of it to release, and which to keep hidden. The modern man confuses expression with strength. He believes that to exist, he must announce his existence. But the powerful man, the centered man, knows that true authority doesn't need to declare itself. His silence is not weakness, it's precision. He does not speak to fill the void, he speaks to define it. To remain silent in a world addicted to noise is to resist its manipulation. Every word you give becomes a thread others can pull. Every reaction becomes data, a signal, a way for the world to map your mind. But the one who observes quietly cannot be mapped. He becomes unreadable, and therefore untouchable. This is the essence of controlled power, the ability to hold what others cannot contain. When others rush to react, he waits. When others expose their thoughts, he refines his. When the storm of words passes, he is the only one still standing, calm and complete. The true measure of strength is not in how loudly you speak, but in how deeply you listen. Not in how much you reveal, but in how much you understand before you choose to act. Silence, when mastered, becomes the highest form of speech. It transforms from emptiness into influence, from absence into presence. And so the truth comes full circle. Silence is not retreat, it is preparation. It is the breath before creation, the stillness before strategy, the calm before power moves unseen. In a world where everyone shouts to be heard, the one who remains silent does not disappear. He becomes the echo that never fades.